Hey, this is Byron from Proto Software, and I'm going to show you how to build this Yahoo deep search with multiple phrases application that I recently built and posted on the Proto gallery. The way that this module works is you enter in a couple of search phrases, you hit deep search, uses the Yahoo REST APIs and goes and fetches 100 results for each one of the phrases, and then buckets those to show the URLs where the URL showed up in more than one or multiple search phrases. Then finally, clicking on these, you can see some deep results, and then finally hit Launch Selected URL, which will launch the URL in your default browser. So let's go back to Proto, and I'll do File, New, and show you how to build this as your first Proto mashup. The first thing we're going to do is insert a component, and a component, I'll search Yahoo and then look on the online gallery. A component is a piece of Proto functionality that is reusable. You can upload them to the Proto component library online for other people to use. So let's select Yahoo Web Search. I'll click Open. Proto's going to go ahead and download that and drop it into my building environment. Now I've got a security warning here because the Yahoo component uses VBA to make the REST requests. But we'll click OK. And now you'll see I have this Yahoo Web Search component. If I go to the viewer by clicking in the bottom right, switch to viewer, and I'll right click now and select edit controls, you can see that I can actually modify this component, change its UI. I can go in and tweak the functionality and everything about it, but we're going to use it pretty much as a function, not as a user interface component. So let's open it up. I'm going to make it not visible, hit save, and now I can use it through its inputs, these user-defined inputs, which are documented, you can see on the top right in the guide, and its outputs. If I want to test to see how it works, I can right-click and say Create Example Inputs and Outputs, and this will just pull out some scaffolding. I'll delete the App ID text box. This will pull out some scaffolding so I can go and really quickly test it. So if this was a new component and I hadn't used it before, I might want to come to the viewer and just kind of play around a little bit and see that it works, see how it returns results and how the inputs work. Okay, so let's go back to the builder now and actually start building the deep search functionality. And to do this, we're going to add a table, and I'm going to go to its property panel and define an entry set. An entry set has attributes, results. I'll hit create, and let's change the label here to enter phrases. And now let's go back to the viewer and put this up in the top left, and I'll put in a couple phrases here to get us started. Desktop mashup, end user programming mashup, VBA Excel mashup, desktop web service. So we're now going to use that Yahoo component that we saw to run for each one of these search phrases, and then we're going to use Proto to do some analytics on that data, to do the bucketing and sorting so that we can then click on those deep results and launch them in the browser. So to map this Yahoo Web Search component, or a function really, over this this table of data, we're going to use a module called the Attribute Calculator. The Attribute Calculator takes as an input an entry set, and I'll mouse over this entry set. You can see that the table now is just sending its data as an entry set to the Attribute Calculator, and then it also takes a function. Now a function could be a formula, but in this case we're actually going to use a component, and in fact you can use any user-built component as a function to operate over data. So to set up the attribute calculator, we will say we're going to process each entry, and then at each entry we want to send in the search phrase, and the source is going to be from a range inside the entry set. The range will be from the selected attribute search phrases and the current entry. And then next we're going to take the output, so those search results, which actually will come out as a whole entry set, but we can store that entry set in the single cell location at the results attribute in the input entry set. So that's kind of a mouthful, but let's click save and you can see how it works. So Proto's executing. It's running this Yahoo search for each of those three phrases. And when it's done, we can put on a table, and now let's just look at the results, and I think this will make sense. Let's go back to the viewer. And so now you can see there's an entry set, which is the result set for each of these search phrases. Okay, next step. Let's take off the results attribute, and we'll use an attribute editor to pull that off. I'm just going to select results, click save. And now let's go get another component called extract embedded entry sets, which will take a set of entry sets that are embedded inside of another entry set and pull them all out and put them back together so that what we get is one big table with all of the rows. So now back in the viewer, let's look at these extracted entries, and we should see that there's 300, which represent all of the search results. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete this connection now, and we're going to use a module called the simple report. And the simple report is sort of like a real basic pivot table. If you think of Excel, it allows you to do things like grouping, summing, and aggregating. So we're going to group by the URL, and we're going to count, and then we can pick any old attribute to count. So we'll take entry set row, hit save, and we're also going to use a sorting module. Let's take the output from the simple report and plug that into the sorting module. And let me just hover over this data, and in fact I'll right click and pull up a data view so you can see what data has come out of the simple report, and we see that it has the URLs and then the buckets here. So let's sort these now by the entry set row, which was where we stored the count, the number of times the URL showed up, and we'll sort it descending so that we can see those URLs that have the highest correlation between the multiple searches. So now we'll put those results into table 4, which we should probably rename. And let's make this a little bit easier on the eyes. Move this table around. And now you can see we've got 7 results which showed up in a crossover between one of these search phrases, which is cool. It tells us some contextual information that this URL showed up in multiple searches. So let's go back to the builder, and finally I'm going to add a module. We'll search for URL. I'm trying to use only modules that are available on the gallery to show you how someone who is new to Proto could do this their first time. We'll take launch URL or navigate. This will navigate to any URL in your default browser. Again, we get the VBA warning just because it's using VBA code. And so let's take from the table outputs the get cell double clicked value, and you can see I'm about to make a connection now to do launch URL. So now when I double click on the a cell in the table, it will send that value down this connection to this component, which if I look inside of it, right click and open it up, all this is doing is calling some VBA code. Let's go to the Visual Basic Editor, and you can see in here it's making a couple calls, nothing too fancy, but something I don't want to learn how to do or redo again. So I'm using it in a component without ever having to look inside. Let's go back to the viewer, lay this out a little bit over here, and let's go down here and double click on this. Looks interesting, making money in the mashup economy. And it pulls this up in my default browser, and that's it. That's the deep search.